Welcome to Remarkable Retail Podcast, Season 7, Episode 2. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm Steve Dennis.
In this episode, recorded live in person in New York City at the Lead Innovation Summit on a bustling show floor, Brie Olson, CEO, Pacsun.
We have various reasons why we try to get certain leaders on the podcast. The general, criterion being, are they a remarkable, truly remarkable retailer doing interesting things? Do we think they're going to be a good interview, et cetera? And I think that's definitely pays off here. The other thing I was thinking about, which I didn't necessarily know so much going into this, is that we really haven't focused very much on the Gen Z consumer. So I think the lens on that sort of business is definitely additive, and Brie is obviously able to speak to that directly. And the other thing, which I hadn't appreciated until right before we did the interview, because we got to see her on stage at the Lead and hear that interview, was they're actually a company that's a great example of experimentation, but also having some success in, wait for it, the Metaverse.
I know. I was very conflicted when I wasn't conflicted at all, but she said, we're getting some success. I'm like, somebody's getting success. We've been saying it's not successful, but I was excited to hear that. I guess a youth-oriented brand like theirs would be one that you would figure if you can't do something in the Metaverse, it's a complete canard. But no, they were excited about it, and they had some great progress. Now, speaking of live, we have one more episode recorded at the Lead coming for you listeners, and then you and I will be live together in Vegas again. So viva Las Vegas. That's right. At Grocery Shop in the Vantage podcasting studio, Mandalay Bay. Vantage, by the way, turnkey retail media networks are changing the relationships between retailers and vendor brands. Unlock your first-party data to drive powerful advertising campaigns. They help retailers and brands reach the right people every stage of the customer journey and sell their products and services across the world. So, interesting that we have a retail media networks sponsor for the podcast studio, because, boy, there was a lot of talk about that last year. So it'll be interesting to see if that's the buzz on the floor Grocery Shop this year as well. All right, well, let's get into the news. Less of a catch-up than our last episode together, but there's lots going on in terms of, there's some economic news out today, freshly baked out today, and then some retail news. And let's dive into it. What do you make of what you're hearing from the economist types?
Well, my hope for this season is that we were able, and I guess we get to decide this, but I feel like it's important to touch on the macro stuff periodically. But I hope things will settle to a point where we don't feel compelled to talk about it so much. But yeah, the last couple of weeks, first of all, we've seen, not unexpectedly, interest rates take another tick up. U.S. Fed took rates up to a 22-year high. The Bank of England did an increase. The Bank of Japan did this guidance thing that I don't completely understand. But essentially, we're at the point where I think most people feel like there's still maybe some room for interest rates to go up, but we're nearing the end of the cycle. I think the thing that's been most interesting and really to me kind of crystallized, I guess, the last several weeks is how much we've gone from this narrative from, say, a year ago, where something like close to 100% of the economists were saying there was going to be a recession.
Yeah.
Jamie, I think we mentioned this on the podcast. Jamie Dimon, the guy who runs JP Morgan, said, brace yourself for really rough stuff. And then,
brace. I was expected to put my head between my knees after listening to that.
So, the months go by, and things don't get so bad. So one of the things that the Fed said, Chairman Powell said in his comments, was essentially, we don't think there's going to be a recession. And now a lot of the other economists and other companies are really pointing to the likelihood, not guarantee, but the likelihood of a soft landing. And if you look at the U.S. in particular, which is right now, despite Biden getting no credit for it, which is a whole other podcast, the U.S. has got the best economy in the world, and 2% or 2.4%, I think it was, GDP growth. So,
and I saw some news out this morning, right, that there's still job growth, like 190,000 new jobs, which is off a little bit, but it's still growth, in the middle of the summer, right?
Yeah, I think most things that are headwinds or potential headwinds are relatively minor, but we'll see. I'll come back to that in just a second. The other thing that's really emerged in the past month or so is, and this was not true, and I think it was one of the reasons why there was a lot of concern about a recession, was that discretionary income was not keeping pace with inflation. We had great job market and wages growing, but with inflation in the high single digits, that discretionary income was getting crunched. Last several reports have shown that discretionary income, particularly among lower income families, is growing faster than inflation. So you combine that with, you referenced it just this morning, the U.S. reported some slowing in job growth, but a tick down again to unemployment being 3.5%. So it's really hard to imagine, barring some, crazy exogenous factor, that things are going to fall off the cliff. I think just quickly, some things to watch. There's a little bit of this COVID spike, though it appears to be fairly minor and not, people aren't getting super sick. Gas prices have been ticking up a little bit.
A lot of air conditioning. I was reading an article about it, and you sitting in a fairly warm Dallas, Texas,
106 degrees. Yes,
I suspect you're spending a little bit more time inside in air conditioning than you might like, and maybe that. The good news is on the COVID thing that they say it's not a new variant. It's just people are kind of inside, and it's lots of air conditioning. I've had a few friends who've got COVID and not pleasant, but they kind of made it through. And so there you go. So,
so we'll see. I think, the things three things I'll be watching for as we go forward. One is, and of course, this is the thing that has surprised everybody. I think most people thought, well, when you raise interest rates by over 5%, that's going to lead to a significant slowdown in the economy. That hasn't happened. One thing that I remember from my economics day, and I've heard people starting to talk about, is that generally speaking, there's a pretty significant lag in the effect of interest rates, more like 18 months. So
trailing indicator versus leading indicator stuff.
So I think that's why people are starting to be a little bit more concerned about the early part of next year. This is very much a U.S.-centric issue with this college debt repayment starting back up to September. And then a number of people have pointed to, the thing that's really kept or helped keep the economy resilient, other than just the great job market, is that consumers had a lot of reduction in debt, as well as cash reserves from saving money by not going out and traveling, as well as stimulus payments. But they are burning through that pretty quickly. And most estimates show that they'll be back to kind of the pre-COVID balance sheet levels by January. And if they keep tapping into cash at that rate, then that could definitely have some impact. So we'll see. We know we've been wrong. I've been wrong about
everybody's been wrong. Things. It was closest to right. We interviewed him at the beginning of the year, Ira from Deloitte. He was saying, "No, I'm not convinced the America's going into a recession." And other parts of the world, yes, but he was right. And by the way, I'll give you some local feedback about the economy. Things are looking up in Toronto. We now have Taylor Swift in residence for 6 straight shows. So that's going to boost the economy, just kind of like the Beyonce Barben.
Well, it's funny you say that. Yeah, because I saw a couple people talk about, and actually, apparently, I didn't. I saw this reference. I didn't actually read it myself. Apparently, in the Fed minutes or something, maybe it was in the press conference. They alluded to the Barbenheimer and the Taylor Swift effect, because people. I mean, Barbenheimer, or Barbie and Oppenheimer together, have already, in a short amount of time, grossed over $1 billion, which is, it's not an insignificant amount of money in a few weeks, right? Yeah. And then the Taylor Swift thing, which is a phenomenon, not only obviously are the ticket sales, but, you get the hotel and the travel and all that kind of stuff. And I think Sweden even called out that in their GDP report that she was responsible for 0.4 of the growth. And then you got what may well be, not to get into a Taylor versus the Queen kind of thing here, but you got the Beyonce tour starting off, which is going to be massive. So these are kind of these exogenous, largely one-time sort of thing. So it's interesting that those get called out.
Let's talk about what you've been observing in the world of retail. Now, Amazon out this week with some results that, what did I see? Crushed it in terms of expectations. I mean, it made me think back to our discussion around how is Prime Day, and we don't know. I guess we know a little bit more today. What did you think of the overall Amazon results?
Actually, we don't know anything about Prime Day because that is in their next quarter's results. They referenced it in their release, but the sales are not in this quarter, so we won't know about that until the next quarter. But I mean, first of all, I hate to recommend another podcast, but I suspect that our friends Jason and Scott over the Jason and Scott show will do a very deep dive into the Amazon earnings, which will be out by the time this comes out. So if you really want to go deep, they always do a great job on that. But the highlights were, it was a blowout quarter. It not only was strong objectively, because sometimes we get into this, well, is it strong objectively or just compared to expectations? They both beat expectations as well as demonstrably performed very well. Huge swing in profits year over year, pretty much across the board in all other major segments. Strong sales growth in retail overall, though mostly in the third-party services, the physical stores, which is really just about pretty much only Whole Foods at this point, and in their first-party sales, they were just up like 5 or 6%, which is a little bit below the overall trend. Advertising up, I think, 20%. AWS was a little bit of, I don't know if it was a surprise, soft, right? But yeah, it was softer, about 12%, which is kind of in line with where Microsoft is. I think the general narrative there, which is not so much about retail, so I'll be quick, but I think the general narrative is corporations are trying to pull back on their spending. So this is a B2B kind of thing. But yeah, huge profits, huge cash flow. They were very optimistic about the future. One of the things, aside from robust sales growth, that was also huge is they made a lot of progress. They're doing their own year of efficiency, and they cut costs quite a bit. The one number I'll just mention quickly is that their total headcount worldwide, sometimes we talk about the numbers, was down 27,000, which sounds like a lot. But percentage-wise, it was a lot, 4%.
Yeah.
So when you've got a growing business, 10+% sales growth, and you're able to reduce your expenses significantly, guess what? That flows to the bottom line pretty well.
Well, and there's a bunch of other news, right? I mean, what I observed was they're taking another run in general at grocery, and you made a comment that I was thinking at the same time. Is like nothing I saw in their release about what they're going to do for their grocers is anything. I don't want to say anything interesting, but it wouldn't really strike me as wow, that's going to make this the revolutionary grocer of the century. I mean, there's nothing that stood out to me that wasn't kind of, table stakes basically in the business.
Yeah, well, so, we're not formally going back and kind of tracking predictions, but one of my predictions was pretty big changes to the Amazon retail flywheel, and in particular, talking about their physical store strategy. And yeah, they made a big announcement of kind of this reboot. They've closed several fresh stores. They got this new guy or newish guy, Tony Hoggett, I think is his name, from Tesco. So deeply experienced guy. This appears to be kind of the first round of his input. But I think two things. One is, which we've talked about and a lot of other people have talked about, you're in a very crowded space. So if you're going to be successful at the scale Amazon wants to be successful, you're going to have to steal market share from some pretty good players. So what is it?
I was going to say the grocers are no slackers. They're great. There's some fantastic. I mean,
Absolutely.
Think of HEB in your backyard. HEB is a fantastic grocery. You're not walking in and taking share from them easily. That's for sure.
Yeah, and it's actually a little bit. And this is maybe a topic for a whole other episode. There's a famous Jeff Bezos quote, which probably most people will know, is "Your margin is my opportunity," which is very much not the characteristics of the supermarket business. The margins are quite tight, right?
Yeah.
Now, I say that actually that may have been true when they first got started. What I say is I think it's actually more your mediocrity is my opportunity. But here too, like what what need is really being addressed in a remarkable way. And it's hard to see that. So yeah, the things they have talked about in terms of these couple of test stores are kind of like closing the gap with or addressing, some of their shortcomings. So as I always say, bailing doesn't fix the hole. That's not necessarily going to take them to the next level. But we'll see. I mean, I think it'll be much more interesting when they do a greenfield location to see, because I do think the Amazon stores have ended up in a weird space because they're sort of full service, but too small to compete with some of the bigger groceries. And, they're kind of a little bit bigger than Trader Joe's or Aldi or those kinds of things. But, so it's neither fish nor fowl and not in a good way. So we'll see.
Let's talk about Nike. They announced some plans to open a network of boutique fitness studios. I saw our friend Sucharita made a few comments about that. That the folks at Peloton probably didn't greet that with smiles and around the office. What do you make of that Nike's trying to get into the physical fitness and exercise zone? Is this a danger zone for Peloton?
Well, it could be. I think, I guess two things. One is, one of the things and I'm going to keep teasing little nuggets about my forthcoming book, but one of the things I talk a lot about in my next book is brands becoming more platforms. I don't mean in the way we think about, like Facebook as a platform, but more that they're leveraging their relationships directly with consumers to provide more products and services. And Nike's already been pushing on this kind of membership strategy for a while. And so I think this is more about them leaning into being a platform brand and doing things in kind of logical adjacencies. So service-related things that tie back to the core of the Nike brand. So strategically, I think it makes a ton of sense. They certainly know how to operate physical locations, even though these are different. One of the predictions, and again, because we're not formally reviewing them, I'll just mention this quickly. One of my out there predictions, so not in my center, I thought more probable predictions, was that Nike might buy Peloton. And I think, it's a classic buy versus build strategy.
This might take them, in your mind, a step closer to thinking about that.
Well, and I mean, I'm not saying they have any nefarious goals here, but sometimes, you announce a competitive move and the effect of that is it takes your competitor's price down.
Sure.
So we'll see. I think Peloton reports in a few weeks. I mean, it would be great if their value, which is, $4 billion or something. I'm not exactly sure, but, very manageable as an acquisition for Nike. And if they've done a lot of the cleanup of the worst stuff and Nike can actually go in there and get it at a good price and exert some synergy and jumpstart this strategy. It's not clear by opening a few studios whether this is really more of an experiment or, what's their level of commitment. And, maybe they'll see how it goes and Peloton's, still hanging around. Maybe it's a next year thing, but we'll see. But I think, if anything, I think it's more likely that could happen now.
Last couple of things. Let's talk about Wayfair. So, when I read Wayfair results and then I read the reaction, I feel like I'm in some kind of Twilight Zone. Remember that Rod? I don't get it. But
you have the do music.
It's like, what a fantastic company. I'm like, again, what? How? Okay. Like, what were you thinking when you saw the results and then B, the reaction?
Well, on the one hand, being, talking about
economists,
on the one hand, they did perform better than expectations. So the results were less bad than people expected. And that led to a pop in the stock. I think one of the big Wall Street firms initiated coverage with a buy. On the other hand, if you look at some of the stats, their sales were down, forget the exact number, but 3.4%, I think. Active customers down close to 8%, average order down, orders per customer down. So there were a lot of customer metrics that were definitely not great. They lost $142 million for the quarter, not insignificant, but better than they lost last year. Yeah. I guess if you want to be charitable, they have definitely made a lot of progress, similar to Amazon, on their cost structure. I mean, that's the main thing that made the difference is they took a lot of cost out. I don't know how you support this kind of valuation with a business that continues to decline. Now, as we've talked about multiple times, the home category has got some pretty strong headwinds. So I guess they get a little bit of a pass just because things are pretty tough in that category.
Sure.
But it's hard to understand this kind of performance in their stock. I think I looked was up 150% this year. Now it's down like 60% from its high 2 or 3 years ago when I first started going like, what the hell are people doing? But it's a little bit mystifying.
All right. Well, lots of stuff to talk about, a little bit of a catch up there, but let's now move on to our fantastic interview. Once again, recorded live at the Lead Summit in New York City with Brie Olson, CEO of Pacsun.
Well, Brie Olson, welcome to the Remarkable Retail Podcast, live from this craziness around us at the Lead Innovation Summit. How are you this morning?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Steve, for having me on.
Well, we are literally getting you just off the stage, so it's exciting to be able to get into some of the things you talked about. But before we do that, maybe we could just start out with, if you could give us just a little bit about your personal and professional
journey, and then we'll move on to talk about what's going on at Pacsun.
Yeah, wonderful. I've been at Pacsun for 17 years, so I have spent the majority of my career at Pacsun really reinventing the brand alongside an amazing team. Prior to that, I spent about 8 years living in Italy, working in the high-end luxury space. So I worked for Marzotto Group with Gianfranco Ferré and Valentino. I spent about 3 years with that group, and then I worked with an amazing founder on a brand called Hollywood, which is an upscale shoe company that competed with Jimmy Choo and Manolo Blahnik. And we sold to Kelwood Group, and then I had a short stint at Abercrombie, and so that, in a nutshell, is my professional journey. In terms of my personal journey, I actually went back to school when I was 40.
Oh, wow.
And so I took a second run at that. And I have 2 children, an 8-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son.
So you're growing the next generation of Pacsun customers.
Yes, exactly. And I use them often to bounce some ideas off of. Yeah, study group.
So they're all a big, great tax write-off, basically. You can expense your children.
Yeah, you can expense their entire...
I wish that would be...
that's an angle I hadn't thought about. I missed that opportunity.
Well, we have a American and a global audience, so let's not assume everyone knows everything about Pacsun. So tell us about the brand and what's your market and who you speak to and who swings the door and shops your business.
Yeah, of course. Pacsun's been around for about 40 years. So we are based in Newport Beach, and we really, from a brand standpoint, what stayed consistent over the last 40 years is really the curation of the best brands that inspire youth culture. The brand mix under the covers has certainly changed tremendously, in particular over the last 15, when we've taken a focus, more towards youth culture, the intersection of music, sports, all things relevant in terms of social. It's really pivoted from kind of our origination story, which is more in the surf skate landscape. And our customer base is typically 16 to 24 is the sweet spot. We really try to, design and think of a 20-year-old. And then we have recently launched a children's line, which is 4 to 14, and it is 100% gender neutral. So really opening up the boundaries in terms of gender fluidity as we look forward to the future generations.
That's exciting. So let's talk about Gen Z for a second, or Gen Z.
I translate for us, Mike.
Translate for us. What are some of the unique characteristics? I mean, we have these age demographics thrown around a lot and these cohorts thrown around a lot, that everyone is unique. And what's your perspective on what makes this particular segment or generation unique and different? And what are some of their important characteristics?
What I think is most unique for us is the ability to have access to this generation all the time. So if you need feedback on something, or our team is curious about something, whether that's a future product or a concept or a marketing concept, you can launch it live on TikTok. You can get feedback immediately. And I think that feedback circle and the willingness of the Gen Z community to engage with brands that they love on a daily, hourly basis is really exciting in terms of data and input. And so when we think about our consumer base, we've really kind of pivoted the concept to crowdsource the future alongside the community, and really we're building a brand together. So we're building the future designs, we're building our future marketing objectives all alongside the consumer. And it really layers it deeper into the organization as well when you think about also designing the next denim line and getting the feedback and getting that live feedback and designing it alongside the consumer as opposed to designing for the consumer.
One of the challenges sometimes is consumers don't tell you they don't like something you're doing, they just leave. Would you say this generation is very vocal? They help you design, they tell you what you love, but they also tell you what we like a bit less. We may or may not be something you're doing, but does that feedback also craft your thinking around the product?
I actually think that the Gen Z culture also has a high cancel culture, and so brands have to be extra cognizant of what they're putting out there. So there's an immediate dialogue, but there's also a lot of judgment, and I think prior generations might have been more forgiving. I think we are incredibly thoughtful about all of the core purpose of the brand, our key values as a brand, and what really matters, because it does matter to the consumer segment, and I think it's very sensitive.
And that's, I think, a great segue into getting into what you were talking about here at the Innovation Summit. I love the title, Inclusivity, Collaborations, Web3, What It Takes to Maintain Youth Culture Relevance. So, Brie, what does it take to maintain youth culture relevance?
At the core, I think Pacsun is very fortunate to have an amazing team. The majority of our team has been there for 10 plus years. They're very engaged in our community, and I would say all really striving towards the same common purpose. Our purpose alone is not to sell clothes to kids. It's to inspire the future generation, to create more creativity, to create more inclusivity, to create a brighter future for those that are coming. And so I think with that in mind, it really helps us to craft the right brand partnerships. It helps us, those core values help us to pick who we want to work with in the future, who aligns with our core values, which brand partners, which designers, which athletes make sense to be a part of this community to help in, bringing our vision to life.
I mean, I knew that Pacsun was very involved with a lot of collaborations. I guess until I was listening to you go through some of them and how you put them together and what they mean to the brand, I didn't appreciate the richness of that. Could you just talk a little bit, maybe just remind our audience a little bit some of the brands or some of the personalities that you work with, but tell us a little bit about how you put those together and how important they are to driving the business.
Yeah, over the last decade, we've worked with a range of talent varying from Kanye West, Virgil Abloh, Jerry Lorenzo with Fear of God, to Kendall and Kylie when they were 12 and 15, signing them that early and a decade worth of partnership with them.
A pretty good move, huh?
Yeah, as they've evolved in their space. Storm Reed, Ryan Destiny, Emma Chamberlain, most recently A$AP Rocky as our creative director. And really, the impetus is finding partners who share a true passion for our brand, our space, and want to create something for the future generation. And so, for example, when we were in early conversations and dialogue with Rocky, he really has a beautiful nostalgia of remembering shopping in Pacsun stores growing up, and shopping in the mall and wanting to bring his creative vision and his ideas to life for the younger generation. And that was similar in conversations that we had with Virgil or Heron Preston, really having that true affinity for Pacsun the brand, and also genuine care for, making the future generations doing better for them, and a huge kind of corporate and social responsibility around that. And so all of our partners really share in that common vision, and I think that common thread has helped us to pick the right partners at the right timing.
Sure, and I imagine it just gives you this huge point of differentiation, right? So it's not, so many brands today I think really suffer from carrying products that are widely distributed, and it's very hard to tell the difference between one retailer versus the other, and it ends up becoming more of a price game as opposed to, really feeling that connection to the brand.
Yeah, absolutely. And another unique part of our brand mix is creating partnerships business to business. So Pacsun was the first brand partner to have a partnership with Formula One, which was launched about 6 months ago. And, from Netflix to how Formula One is showing up in the U.S., really making a footprint in terms of how important that is to youth culture, as well as our partnership with Land Rover, really bringing unique partnerships to life from a brand-to-brand perspective as well.
Right. No, it's so interesting. So one of the things, when I was doing some research, and listeners will be shocked to know that I actually do research before we do these interviews, but I went back and found the video of you at Shoptalk last year talking about the Metaverse. And one of the things that, I don't know how much everybody's talking about, but we talk a lot about how last year seemed to be all about the Metaverse. And this year it's like Metaverse, Schmetaverse, that's not working, Web3, hyped, etc. Now it's all AI. But it sounds like, first of all, you've had some incredible success. Maybe you're one of the few retailers that's actually got quite a lot of traction, I think particularly on Roblox. But you also shared how your first effort at it really didn't go as planned. So I guess two things. One is just talk a little bit about that particular aspect of the strategy and how you're making it work for you, but also that journey of experimentation that got you to the level where you are today.
To speak, you're like a Metaverse unicorn. So tell us about that.
I think the Metaverse is still a tremendous opportunity, I think, for a lot of brands. We didn't jump into the metaverse because it was a trend. We decided to explore Web3 and the metaverse because our customer was showing up there. And all of our strategic decisions are really based off of the belief that our customer is the pioneer of the future from a cultural standpoint, and that we need to be in lockstep with them in our exploration and discovery efforts. And so early on in 2018, we recognized that Roblox was gaining a lot of traction, and our audience was spending a lot of time there in 2019 and 2020. That really escalated due to the pandemic. And so our first foray into Roblox was very challenging. We thought that we could have a game up and running within 3 months. About 9 to 10 months later, we still didn't have a game in this space. I think, we didn't recognize how difficult some of the uplift would be to really build this community online. And at the end of our game launch, we had about 10,000 kids playing in the space, which was pretty underwhelming versus our expectations. But part of the philosophy and the vision and the mission at Pacsun is to constantly keep exploring. If something doesn't work and we see challenges, really view that as part of the path to success,
right,
and allowing teams to fail fast so that they can retool, re-strategize. So we spent more time with the customer, spent more time on Roblox, found a new agency out of Sweden, relaunched our game 3 months ago, and proudly have over 10 million active users.
Yeah. Wow.
So 10,000.
When I heard that number,
million.
I was like,
I was impressed by 10,000, actually.
Thanks.
That number impressed me to begin with.
Meta was impressed with 10,000, so I think...
I know.
So, and the average time that they're spending is 28 minutes, which, that exceeds the amount of time that a consumer could be spending on your digital site, particularly on your social sites. And so the opportunity for them to engage in that space, I think, is very meaningful. And so from that standpoint, because our consumer is still there, because they're showing us that they're engaging, they're buying the clothing that we offer, the digital clothing is being purchased at a high rate on Roblox, the same clothing that they're also purchasing physically in stores. So for our consumer segment, I would say we've had great success. I would say in other areas such as NFT or crypto that we started out early, we've seen moderate success. And so it's more modest, but it's a balance. So I think taking that very balanced approach and continuing to focus where the consumer is spending time is the most important piece.
Sure. No, I think so often we see folks fall in love with the technology, and then they're trying to find customers for it, and you really came at it the other way around, which seems to make a lot more sense. So I'll turn it back to Michael in a second, but I did also want to touch on, you talked a little bit about your gender fluid merchandising strategies. Could you just talk a little bit more about how you're exploring that and how that's working for you?
Yeah, over the last 5 years, really from an observation standpoint and an active listening standpoint with our consumer, we started to notice both in-store and on-site behavior where consumers were shopping differently. They were shopping very fluidly across the genders. And so they really see no differentiation between buying something from one area versus the other. So we tried to take away, first of all, from a strategic and philosophical standpoint, the typical gender barriers that we had accumulated over the last 20 years and tried to create a much more seamless shopping experience for the consumer online. And then also broke down a lot of the physical barriers in store to ensure that the customers felt very comfortable shopping however they would like to shop. And so it's really allowing the customer, again, to lead the way in terms of shopping in the way that's most meaniful to them.
Say more about that. Is that meaning, if I walked into a typical store, women's on the right, men's on the left, unisex changers, what does that mean, breaking down the barriers in a physical store?
Yeah, so typically there would be a front table that would alternate between a men's or a women's moment. Now we have so many shared moments between special brand collaborations such as Formula One, Land Rover, Fear of God, Supervision. We have those moments always be genderless. And then we had built over the last 10 years mod walls that actually separated the store, historically thinking that, that separation would help each of the genders feel more comfortable shopping in our space. And we've taken those down over time and really built a much more open format for our stores. So if you go into our new store on Broadway here in New York, or the new store in Fashion Island in Newport Beach, you'll see a much different format in terms of how we are pathing the customer's journey throughout the space physically, and then also mirroring that online.
Super interesting. Let's talk about the evolving competitive set. So it's not unusual for any retailer to have new competitors come and go. In your particular area, you've had some pretty interesting online competitors come up, and very youth-oriented with some great appeal, big, flashy numbers. How do you think about that when you think about your assortment, and how, do you get back to the basics and continue to do your collabs and do all these things? So it's just interesting. There's a lot of energy around new online brands, for example, in your space. So how do you think about that? You and the team think about that?
The first is that we stay very focused. We believe that for our customer, having a balance between physical stores and our digital presence is incredibly important. They still very much value the experiential part of physical stores. And so we're proud of that. That will be another area of focus. We will continue to open new stores. We also see simultaneous to that, with the entire pie growing, digital growth and digital opportunity. When it comes to a competitor standpoint, Pacsun is not chasing other people's brand strategies. We are very proud of the strategies that we have, and they also tie back to things that are important to us, such as ethical production and sourcing that might come at a higher cost, and then we have to pass a higher cost along to the consumer, but that we know that we are sourcing in a way that our customer would be proud of. And I think some of the competitors that you could be alluding to might not be following those same philosophies or practices. And so I think there's definitely a very large market size out there. I think there's a lot of opportunity for Pacsun's growth. I think what we're most proud of is our very unique product mix and our brand pipeline. And so I tend to keep the teams laser focused on really the amplification and the acceleration of the things that we can do in market that are unique, that other brands don't have and haven't created that pipeline for, as opposed to chasing trends.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Shifting gears a little bit, let's talk about social media. So it feels like part of your brand is to create great vibes in all the places you are in, whether it's Roblox or social media. Social media for the youth hasn't always been a great place for great vibes. How do you think about that in terms of making sure that you're doing the right thing by your customer?
There's a lot of social responsibility and corporate responsibility, and really taking conscious leadership at its core. We spend a lot of time and effort focusing on creating safe environments, both online, in our Roblox experiences, from a TikTok perspective, from Instagram, Snapchat, Threads, and trying to also create a dialogue for the consumer so that it's two-way communication, and so that it is a community that is a positive community, that we don't have tolerance for negativity and those comments, and an inclusive community. And inclusivity and diversity have been core pillars for Pacsun in terms of a lot of our choices, in terms of brand partnerships and relationships, and at the core, what we have chosen to stand for. And our community and philanthropic work is another really core piece of the work that we're doing in Los Angeles, and the work that we're doing in total is a really important part of our core strategy for our brand. And so I think it's something that we cannot take lightly, and it's going to be an evolving space. And I think the space will continue to evolve, but it is a core focus for the organization.
Okay, great.
So we love talking about strategy, we love talking about innovation, we also love talking about leadership. And one of the things I saw in an interview, kind of in a different vein here, was that one of the qualities you really look for when you're interviewing candidates is empathy. And that attracted my attention. I'm working on a leadership book, and that's part of the route I've been going down, and I'm starting to hear this from people more and more, which I don't feel like, at least when I got started in business, I'm not sure empathy was probably the opposite of that. Really was kind of what was looked for in leadership positions. So, but can you talk a little bit about why that quality is so important for you and for your organization, and also maybe how do you spot it?
Yeah, I think empathy is so incredibly important. It is a part of what builds a culture of true trust. It is part of what allows for creativity and innovation to flourish, which are two of Pacsun's core values. And it's also creating a positive and optimistic place to work. And so things can be really challenging. You want there to be overall balance, and you want people to enjoy and be happy at work. And I think empathetic leadership has to lead the way. And it starts, with all of the leaders within the organization and cascading that down. It is also what I look for in hiring new leaders to come in, because a lot of people have the basic skill set, but can they be vulnerable with their team? Can their team really learn to trust them? Does trust go back and forth? And I think when you learn to be able to actually show up as your true self in all aspects of your life, not having a separate person that shows up at work than what shows up in your personal life, then you're able to show up as your full self and you can be a full leader. And I think, I agree, 20 years ago, empathetic leadership wasn't even a conversation at the table, and it was actually the inverse in terms of what we were experiencing. But you can yield even better results by having a team that is well-gelled, A, with purpose, so that a team is purpose-led, and B, with empathetic leadership leading the way. And so,
No, I love that. So before we let you run, one last question. What's next for Pacsun? I know one of the things you mentioned on stage was some more focus on international. I guess you're already in China to a certain degree, and I think the UK as well. What international growth?
Ships to Canada too, by the way.
Absolutely, ships to Canada.
Michael always has to make. He's like, do you get like a commission from the
federal government?
Trade?
The federal government kicks me in a bit. A couple
try
of
to talk people into. Well, with the retailers leaving Canada, you got to try to get some back in.
We're looking for great retailers all the time.
We have a proud partnership ongoing for 6 years now with Selfridges in the UK. So that has been ongoing, and we're looking for future partnerships in that vein as we expand in Europe. And then from an international expansion standpoint in China, we've actually taken a very different approach. And really because of our Gen Z consumer, we've launched 100% live stream. So the results have been very exciting. We have not taken a brick and mortar approach. We've taken an approach on Douyin. And so I think it's a very different approach, but we're seeing nice results. But what I'm most excited about is the growth of the team and the acceleration of their ideas. We've also launched something called Think Tank within Pacsun, which is pretty exciting. We try to tackle kind of the largest things out there. So for example, the first thing we tackled was our brand pipeline, and we bring in cross-functional folks from throughout the organization to weigh in on areas that are not their focus. So someone in planning and allocation weighing in on what they think the next brand collaboration should be. And the ideas that came out of it are actually fascinating. It has been really interesting and unlocked a whole different way of creative thinking within Pacsun. The next one that's being hosted next week is all on AI. And so it'll be really interesting to see people that are not technology-based weighing in on how they think that technology should be used. So a lot of excitement happening internally within the organization to produce these exciting results as we look forward for Pacsun.
It's interesting, almost like setting up a red team, in a strategy session. I'm going to set a team over here that is just going to criticize the strategy. Super interesting approach. Well, Brie, listen, thanks so much for sitting down with us here at the Lead Innovation Summit. Fresh off the stage, busy day for you. But thanks for spending time with the Remarkable Retail Podcast. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you both for having me.
If you like what you heard, please follow us on Apple, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform so you can catch up with all our great episodes, including our recent interview with Carrie Baker, President, Canada Goose. And be sure to drop us that 5-star review where you listen to your podcast. It really helps us spread the word.
And I'm Steve Dennis, strategy and innovation consultant, keynote speaker, and author of the best-selling book, Remarkable Retail: How to Win and Keep Customers in the Age of Disruption. You can learn more about me at stephenpdennis.com, and be sure to follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram.
And I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer retail growth consultant, keynote speaker, and producer and host of a series of retail trade podcasts, including this one. You can learn more about me on LinkedIn. Safe travels, everyone.